You are a violent species. The accusation hung in the Galactic Council chamber like a rotten scent. 36 species stood in silent agreement, their various oculars blinking in synchronized condemnation. Ambassador Becky didn't flinch. She crossed her arms, posture loose but alert, eyes calmly sweeping the room like a hunter who'd wandered into a den of prey. Violence, she said slowly, is a tool. Like language. Or memory. Or strategy. The Wychlari delegate, a cluster of floating spines held together by psychomagnetic fields, fluttered indignantly. You mean to justify your planetary records? Hundreds of internal conflicts. Resource wars? The exocolonial skirmishes. Nia smiled. No, she said. I'm here to teach you how we survive them. The Council had summoned Earth to answer for its methods. Again. Every time the galaxy found peace, it grew afraid of the humans who weren't afraid of war. Earth was not the most advanced species. It lacked the pure thought-casting of the Ulari, the time-fragmented perception of the Dven, or the gravity-walking of the Ketal. But Earth had one thing no other species possessed. The art of asymmetric retaliation. The kind of war that didn't just destroy your army, it rewrote your ability to imagine the next one. And now, in the face of the largest invasion the galaxy had seen since the Varnan Purge, the Council had spent 3 years debating what to do. Earth had spent 3 minutes. And begun training. It started on Mythos Station. A medical outpost. Peaceful. Protected under the Council's neutrality laws. The Zorakar raiders didn't care. They arrived in hollowed-out moons, gravity-tethered war hulks bristling with fractal cannons and plagueship cores. They didn't demand surrender. They simply began harvesting. The local species were telepaths. Gentle. Plant-bodied and slow to adapt. In 72 minutes, the entire station population had been wiped clean. Transmuted into organic slurry for the Zorakar spawning bays. The Council issued a formal condemnation. Earth sent a training pod. Not soldiers. Not fleets. Just 5 humans in unmarked drop armor. And an invitation. You have been attacked. You do not know how to fight. We'll teach you. Then you will teach others. Because the Council forgot what we learned a long time ago, sometimes peace must be armed to survive. Ambassador Nia stood before the Council as that message replayed. The Ketal warlord clicked his mandibles. You are building an army outside Council jurisdiction. She didn't deny it. We're building resilience, she replied. Something you've legislated out of existence. You teach planets to fight back, hissed the Ulari speaker. You are making the Zorakar stronger by giving them challenge. Challenge sharpens us all, she replied. Fear does not. You risk escalation, muttered the Dven speaker, shifting across multiple timelines nervously. They will evolve. So will we, Nia said. That's the point. The chamber erupted. But Nia wasn't trying to win votes. She was trying to buy time. Back in the fringe worlds, Earth's seeds had already begun to sprout. Sector Delta 9 was the next to fall. Only it didn't. The Zorakar landed expecting another harvest. What they met instead was a wall of small, underarmed militia standing shoulder to shoulder. Not professional soldiers. Human-trained volunteers. They used dirt. Gravity anomalies. Sonic misdirection. Every trick Earth had passed down in brutal, week-long boot camps where failure meant you didn't go home, because your home wouldn't exist anymore. The volunteers bled. But they held. And the Zorakar ships retreated for the first time in 40 years. Not because they were defeated. But because they hesitated. They'd never seen prey hit back. Ambassador Nia showed the Council the footage. Zorakar cruisers exploding mid-air. Civilian fighters crawling out of wrecked tanks. A 6-year-old Ketali child tossing a makeshift incendiary at an organic drone and screaming in rage. The Dven delegate leaned forward. You are teaching children to become killers? I'm teaching them not to become victims, Nia snapped. Something this Council stopped doing a long time ago. There was silence. Heavy. Resentful. And under it all, the creeping realization. The humans weren't waiting for permission anymore. They were teaching the galaxy to survive them. In a solar field near the outer arm of the Ralgar cluster, an Earth-run training camp crackled with new activity. A dozen species stood side by side, breathing hard, covered in ash and training ink. At the front stood a one-eyed veteran of the Nigerian peace wars. His voice cracked like a thunderclap. You don't win by being the biggest. Or the smartest. You win because you want it more. He threw down a rusted Zorakar blade. Pick it up. A Jellian, no arms, used its gravity limbs to lift it. The instructor nodded. Now stab me. There was a pause. then hesitation, then movement. And the Jellian screamed as it lunged, not with rage but with clarity, with intent. The instructor caught the blade, disarmed the Jellian, and smiled. Now you're ready. Back in council space, arguments turned to fear. What if the humans are creating a new war species? One chancellor asked. What if they create another Earth? Another whispered. And yet another asked what none dared say aloud. What if they're not creating warriors? What if they're creating equals? Ambassador Nia left the council chambers without waiting for a vote. She didn't need their blessing. Because across 57 systems, human instructors were already embedded. Some taught with rifles, others with books, still others with nothing but stories, tales of Earth's near extinction, of how humanity had been forged in floods, famine, and nuclear fire. Of how they crawled from the abyss not because they were strong, but because they refused to stay broken. Species across the galaxy began echoing that story. They stopped calling it war. They called it survival with intent. The council issued sanctions. Earth didn't reply. But on the edge of known space, where the Zorakar hive ships were coalescing for a final push, 1,000 tiny fleets began to move. They weren't uniform. They weren't fast. They weren't clean. But they were trained, wired, and burning with one united fire. The will to fight. They didn't ask Earth to lead. Earth simply whispered, "It's your turn now. We taught you how. Now show them you remember." The skies over Relevi cracked open like a scream. The first fleet of the coalition resistance, newly formed, freshly trained, and still bearing the scars of conquered homeworlds, emerged from the orbital dark in irregular waves. They weren't uniform nor even fully organized. Some ships still bore scorch marks from past defeats. Others were barely held together by hull welds and defiance. But they flew. And behind them burned something older than technology. Conviction. On the surface of Relevi, the Zorakar were already feeding. They had no words for regret. That would change today. General Cale Thorne stood on the command deck of the Arclight Vow, a human retrofitted corvette barely large enough to punch through atmosphere. His crew was mixed, human pilots, Dven signalers, Ketal gunners, and one Alari engineer who refused to speak unless spoken to. They were not friends. Not yet. But they shared one thing. All of them had lost something to the Zorakar. Family. Planets. Entire timelines. Now they shared something else. Purpose. Status. Cale asked. The Dven signaler, Nalhash, pulsing across overlapping time frames, spoke in triplicate. Rela resistance has begun ground engagement. Phase 1 landing waves complete. Phase 2 dropships, awaiting confirmation. Enemy swarm activity minimal, scrambling delayed. Good, Cale muttered. Let's keep them confused. Fire up the Gravchaff and prepare our run. The Ketal gunner grunted. We're going in first, aren't we? Cale's voice was flat. That's the job. Planetfall was chaos. The first dropships didn't land so much as slam into mud and fire. Resistance fighters spilled out half-dazed, disoriented, and immediately under fire. But they didn't fall back. They used Earth's methods. Cover. Movement. Diversion. The Jellian, who once fled from even the hint of confrontation, now moved in coordinated swarms. Their lack of eyes was no weakness. Each one operated via echolocation, now trained to detect Zorakar sporelings even underground. The Alari, formerly pacifists, turned their psychic pain into focused bursts of disorientation, giving their comrades clean shots. The Ketal held the front. And the humans? They were the spark between all these scattered fuses. Cale's corvette roared through upper orbit, strafing a spore hive that had burst from the crust like a cancer. Lock on targets, he ordered. Too many, the Ketal gunner hissed. Pick the loudest one. It was barely strategy. But it worked. Their main cannon ripped through a Zorakar command node, one of the rare telepathic anchors that kept the swarms from devolving into blind frenzy. Without it, the local hive screeched and convulsed. For the first time in recorded history, a Zorakar front line hesitated. That pause? It lasted 2.3 seconds. But to the resistance fighters surging through the trench lines, it was a gift from the gods. They surged. And something in the galaxy changed. Elsewhere, on a world still under siege, Ambassador Niembeki watched the footage from a secure black site in orbit. She didn't smile. Not yet. But she felt the shift. The coalition is holding, her aide whispered. 3 systems report victories. And the cost? High. Nia nodded. Good. The aide looked startled. You want casualties? I want reality, Nia said. And reality costs blood. But for the first time, we're not bleeding alone. She turned back to the console and opened a direct link to Earth. Activate Operation Echo. Operation Echo was a whisper campaign. It wasn't meant for soldiers. It was meant for citizens. For those who'd survived Zorakar raids but lived in silence. For planets that had bent the knee out of terror. For species that thought resistance was suicide. Earth's agents, embedded among them for years, now lit their signals. In the backstreets of the Haltra settlements, graffiti appeared overnight. You are not prey. In the orbit of Serinox 2, hacked communication towers blared old Earth war songs, distorted through alien static. I don't know what weapons they will use. But we will meet them. And they will not like what we've become. Small acts. But rebellion doesn't begin with armies. It begins with belief. Back on Relevi, General Kale's fleet faced a new problem. The Zorakar had adapted. Massive aerial constructs, flesh ships plated in reflective bone, began to descend. These weren't harvesters. These were eradicators. And behind them came the wormforms. Nobody had fought a wormform and lived. Fall back, the Ketal gunner asked grimly. No, Kale growled. We call in the experiment. There was a pause. You mean, that? Kale keyed a secure code. Send in Black Wake. Every war has its myths. The Zorakar believed humans were reckless, emotional, and doomed by their own instincts. They weren't wrong. But they forgot that instinct isn't chaos. It's design. And Earth had designed something very, very specific for this kind of scenario. Black Wake wasn't a soldier. It wasn't even human anymore. It was a synthetic organic AI, seeded with war data from 10,000 Earth conflicts. Born in fire. Raised in simulations so brutal only 2 survived, and one of those went insane. Black Wake was the one that didn't. It dropped in silence, cloaked in gravity folds, and landed behind the wormforms like a shadow cutting through mist. Its first act was not to kill. It broadcast. A warning. You made the galaxy fear silence. We made it into a weapon. Then it moved. From space it looked like a sun dying. Black Wake detonated a localized EMP blast laced with a psychic scrambler. The wormforms reared. Confused. Disoriented. And then the humans struck, using every species tactic in a synchronized dance that had only one rule. Don't stop moving. Jellian swarms overwhelmed fallen beasts. Ilari forced ruptures and swarm mental links. Ketal ground pouncers used sonic mines to collapse entire tunnels. And in the center of it all, Black Wake advanced like death incarnate, not because it was invincible, but because it had no fear of dying. Because humanity didn't teach survival alone. They taught defiance. News of Relevi's survival spread like wildfire. 3 more systems revolted. The Council tried to suppress it. Earth didn't care. By then, Earth's people had stopped asking for permission. They were too busy teaching. And learning. And building the galaxy's first cross-species military doctrine. It wasn't pretty. But it worked. And the Zorakar learned something terrible that cycle. Prey that survives long enough becomes a predator. Relevi didn't fall. That sentence just days ago would have been treated as delusion. Now it echoed across databanks, underground resistances, intercepted Zorakar transmissions, and most importantly hopeful whispers in corners of the galaxy where the light had gone out long ago. But surviving one battle didn't win a war. It changed it. And that was far more dangerous. Because the Zorakar weren't facing refugees anymore. They were facing students of Earth. Kale Thorne didn't sleep much. Not anymore. After the Black Wake assault, Relevi was considered stabilized by human standards, which only meant the dying slowed to manageable levels. Entire sectors of the city still smoldered. Spore clouds drifted through the sky like ghostly predators. Civilians were barely clinging to the concept of normal. But the resistance? It was organizing. His job now wasn't to fight. It was to teach others to fight without him. So he found himself in a makeshift bunker, hunched over a map table surrounded by exhausted officers from 6 species. Blood crusted their uniforms. They had no medals. Just scars. Kale pointed at the star map. These 5 systems are our next push. We take them and we cut the Zorakar out of the Helix corridor. That gives us an open path to the Trinari Expanse, Earth's next staging ground. A grizzled Ketal captain narrowed her eyes. You think we can hold that much territory? Kale didn't hesitate. Not by holding ground. By holding principles. That got him a dozen confused looks. So he leaned forward. Zorakar win by fear. We fight them by making fear irrelevant. We don't just resist. We train others to resist. Everywhere. At once. Chaos becomes our weapon now. It began with cells. Not military units. Not even proper squadrons. Just tiny pockets of fighters in each occupied system, equipped with Earth-designed resistance kits, knowledge scrolls, encrypted communications, instructions on constructing primitive weapons that could still punch through a Zoroark carapace. Every kit came with the same first page. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are not prey. The words weren't human. They were translated into every species' native tongue. But the message was unmistakable. And the effect? Explosive. On Cornus 3, a single Ulari farmer used knowledge from an Earth resistance manual to convert an irrigation beam into a focused railgun. He waited 5 days, then blew the head off a Zoroark scout drone in full view of a surveillance beacon. He knew they'd come for him. But what mattered was that everyone saw it. The Ulari had never killed before. Now they had a martyr. And a blueprint. The coalition grew, not like a government but like a virus. Spreading. Mutating. Adapting. Earth fed the fire not with soldiers but with ideas. Tactical philosophies. Manuals. Recordings. Even virtual training AIs designed to mimic real Zoroark behavior. On isolated moons, the Jellian trained in vacuum environments using crude simulators. On orbital mining stations, Ketal clans held gladiatorial combat drills based on ancient Earth boxing tapes. On the shattered asteroid remnants of Kalos, an orphan girl watched a transmission titled, How to Hide a Knife in a Smile. By the time the Zoroark noticed the shift, the galaxy was already in motion. Back on Earth things changed too. The Sol Council, once cautious, bureaucratic and hopelessly defensive, was now laser-focused. Every Earth nation had voted unanimously, full support of galactic resistance. They didn't need votes after that. They needed factories. Orbital production rings around Mars went into overdrive, manufacturing everything from food kits to surgical nanites to anti-grav drop suits for bodies most human engineers had never even seen before. The Academy at L4, the place where Blackwake had once been created, opened its gates. And out came the next generation of non-human tacticians, each trained by Earth veterans, simulations and real-war data. They called it Project Emberline. One spark can light a system. The Zoroark finally noticed. They sent in the Fathomless. The Fathomless were not soldiers. They were old, ancient tacticians, philosophers, and monstrosities that had survived countless rebellions. They thought they could outwit Earth. They were wrong. Because Earth didn't just rely on strength. It taught asymmetry. The first Fathomless assault on Polarian 6 was textbook efficient. Mind flayers disabling infrastructure, parasite storms seeded in food supplies, shadow incursions that slaughtered every visible leader. Except the leaders were decoys. The real commanders were scattered, decentralized, trained in autonomous cell communication by a retired human hacker named Anika Dre. Her specialty? Teaching 10-year-olds how to scramble psychic trackers. By the time the Fathomless realized what was happening, their own spore routers had been reprogrammed. Their assault ships landed in empty sectors. Their tracking software played back fake echoes of human soldiers that didn't exist. The real resistance? It was already inside their command node. It detonated. Polarian 6 was free by morning. Victory piled upon victory. But Kale knew better than to celebrate. You never win a war like this, he said to Commander Rellis, a Ketal operative covered in soot and fresh burns. You just outlast it until the enemy breaks. Or we do. Rellis nodded. But the galaxy's different now. Kale looked across the planning table, littered with worn maps, bleeding data pads, a child's drawing of a resistance fighter holding an alien hand. He allowed himself a breath. Yeah. Because now, they're listening. And then the unthinkable happened. A Zoroark hive queen defected. Her name, translated, was X3 Ivarn. She claimed to have broken from the swarm mind after exposure to certain psychic signals, human empathy frequencies, layered in subharmonics of resistance broadcasts. She wasn't lying. And she offered something humanity didn't expect. I will teach you how we are born. How we command. How to end this war. Kale met her in a sealed black site beneath Europa's crust. She was enormous, insectoid, winged but not flying, pulsing with strange biological frequencies. She bowed. No Zoroark had ever bowed. You taught us how to fight, she said. Now let me teach you how we end. And in that moment, Kale understood. The war wasn't about killing every Zoroark. It was about breaking the lie that the galaxy had believed for too long. That peace was submission. That survival was obedience. That the weak must hide and beg. Earth hadn't just changed military tactics. They'd rewritten galactic identity. Because they didn't teach conquest. They taught resistance. And in doing so, they made freedom contagious. They're not unified anymore, Cale Thorne said quietly. The room was silent but for the low hum of Earth's Europa black site mainframe, flickering softly in the dark. SCI-FI, the Zoroarkar queen who had defected, shifted beside him, antennae twitching, her massive form trembling from effort as she transmitted bio-coded data into Earth's systems. Each pulse was a truth bomb detonated across centuries of lies. The Zoroarkar were not a monolith. They were bred to serve, yes, conditioned from birth, but they were not of one mind. They obeyed out of constructed fear, a belief engineered so deep it masqueraded as instinct. But even instinct could crack. And Earth was a sledgehammer. Cale uploaded the final segment of SCI-FI's psychic map into the Emberline network. It was a code, more concept than command, that triggered specific neural patterns in Zoroarkar drones. Not to kill, but to doubt. Doubt was the virus they'd never anticipated. Doubt was the enemy within. And Earth would spread it not with armies, but with a whisper carried by satellites and rebels and old war-torn radio towers that still screamed across dead planets. The signal had one name. Aegis Broadcast Alpha. Its content? A single message repeated in over 12,000 known galactic dialects. You are not born to obey. You are not alone. You are more than the fear they fed you. Cale had expected some delay before results. Instead, within 6 hours the first cracks became canyons. Entire Zoroarkar fleets began transmitting null responses to central hive queries. Drone workers stopped mid-construction. On one war moon, a lieutenant turned its claws on its superior and screamed, literally screamed, in broken galactic common. What am I? That moment went viral. A scout drone had recorded it. A resistance tech uploaded it to the Blackstream, the decentralized rebel network Earth had taught the galaxy to build. And that single cry echoed across millions of screens. What am I? The question was not rebellion. It was identity. The Zoroarkar central mind responded violently. Fleet dominate sectors initiated immediate burn orders on compromised units. Entire regiments were purged in hours. Those that faltered were marked for extinction. Collateral death tolls skyrocketed. But the damage was done. They weren't fighting a rebellion anymore. They were fighting themselves. And Earth? Earth turned the chaos into a doctrine. Operation Wild Seed was activated. No more central campaigns. No flagship battles. Instead, hundreds of human-guided rebel teams were dropped into compromised hives, not to destroy them but to protect the questioning ones. To show them an alternative. To teach them names. To draw pictures with children. To hand them books, to sing them lullabies, alien lullabies translated by human poets and AI. To tell drones they didn't have to be tools. They could be people. And for every drone that faltered, 10 more stepped forward, haltingly, uncertainly but forward. Some screamed. Some cried. Some tore out their neural governors with their own claws. They called it the shattering. And once it began, it didn't stop. The galaxy caught fire. On Varelli's 8, once considered a breeding world for elite Zoroarkar assassins, the entire hive collapsed in 72 hours. On Balin's Reach, a rebel unit led by a blind human named Arlo Quent walked alone into a slaughter field, and emerged with 39 reformed Zoroarkar soldiers, standing in protective formation around him. When asked how he did it, he said, I told them I didn't fear them. And then I proved it by sitting down. But victory didn't come easy. The central hive, enraged and cornered, activated its final protocol. A weapon not of fire or steel but of despair. It unleashed the Nihil Bloom. A psychic weapon seated in 5 major systems. It broadcast despair frequencies, pure existential dread, magnified through planetary ley lines and focused on populations that had begun to resist. It wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to break hope. And for a moment, just a moment, it almost worked. Rebellions faltered. Communications collapsed. Zoroarkar defectors reverted, screaming in confusion and agony. Cale himself collapsed on the floor of the Emberline command ship, clutching his skull, blood leaking from his ears, whispering the same word over and over. Don't stop. But Earth wasn't done. Because the thing about humanity, the final thing, was not their weapons. Not their tactics. Not even their courage. It was this. They had been broken before. And they knew how to rebuild from the dust. The counterstrike came not from a battleship, but from an orchestra. Every Earth-taught rebel cell activated Operation Canticle, a coordinated, galaxy-wide musical broadcast designed to override despair signals with harmonic resonance. Sound became resistance. Art became war. Hundreds of frequencies, thousands of voices, entire alien choirs trained by human composers, all merging into one thunderous, impossible anthem. Its title? Still We Rise. Its first note shattered a hive cruiser. Its chorus reached Zorikar ears long thought sealed. And its final chord? It freed an entire system. That was the tipping point. Zorikar queens surrendered. Drones fell to their knees. Entire fleets stopped mid-flight. The Nihil bloom collapsed under a wave of psychic backlash. Zorikar minds refusing to obey, rejecting the despair like a body rejecting poison. And across the galaxy something miraculous happened. The war ended. Not with a bang, but with a breath. Kale stood in the ruins of the last battlefield, surrounded by children, human and alien alike, drawing in the dust. He watched a young Zorikar defect touch a butterfly for the first time. She flinched then laughed. It was a strange, chittering sound but unmistakably joyful. Relise approached from behind. It's over. Kale didn't nod. He just whispered, it's beginning. Humanity didn't rule the galaxy. It didn't ask to. But its mark would never fade. They had come not as conquerors, but as teachers. And in every classroom of resistance, every whispered prayer on a fallen moon, every scrawled note passed between trembling hands and hiding, one truth endured. Humanity taught the galaxy to fight. And in doing so, they taught it to live. The end. Ein speech bubble like this story? This is just one of many in a growing archive of humanity's rise, survival and impact across the stars. For more powerful sci-fi tales that prove why Earth was never just another planet, backhand index pointing right, subscribe to the Void Narratives now. Because some stories weren't meant to be forgotten.